For getting the certificate here, we can see the flow. First is certificate signing request, which we saw earlier also. The same is the process here. So we get the certificate signing request. Then the CA investigates to ensure requesting the organization is authentic. And once it is ensured by the CA, it will then generate the certificate encrypted with the CA private key. And we will then finally install it on the server where we need to have our certificate installed. So on the CMS here. So for authenticating a server certificate encrypted with CA private key is used, and a server certificate unencrypted using CA public key is shared. There is a trust store where we upload this certificate, which is a trust store containing all trusted CA certificates. It has a CA certificate containing the public key. Then there is mutual authentication. Mutual authentication is where both client and server needs to authenticate one another. So a certificate is installed on both the ends. That is mutual authentication. So a CA can also issue this type of authentication using client certificates. Client certificates are then used by the servers to authenticate the clients. When a user connects to the server, the client and the server will exchange their certificates so that the client can authenticate the server and the server then authenticates the client. So that is mutual authentication. So both sides of the communication needs to be authenticated. Just add it here. So then there is something called certificate trust chain. So a trust chain is where a root CA is required. Then there is a intermediate CA, and let's suppose another intermediate CA. So the root CA is what we signed from, and a root CA is always which is required for all the services as a trusted CA for all these other certificates to be installed. So a trust change always link back to the root CA for authentication. So you must have as a prerequisite for these certificates a root CA. So like we saw in the certificates lab yesterday, we along with the server and client certificates, we installed a root CA certificate. Without that, those server client certificates would also not. So a root CA certificate is required. If there is no trusted root CA, the chain is then untrusted. So the other certificates will get installed but will remain untrusted and not the part of the trusted certificates. Then there is a server certificate we discussed. There is these are different types. Digital signatures created, certificate revocations can be there in case any revocation happens in organization is not authenticated by the CA and so on. These can be some things. TLS verification happens. All right. Next are some prerequisites for the meeting server. Now, this is an important part to understand where, let's suppose you have your CMS installed. CMS, let's suppose you have installed the virtualized environment of CA. It is installed, and once it is installed, you want to access the CMS to configure, monitor your meetings and everything. So for that, we need to have the services enabled, which needs to be done through CLI. Yeah. So these are some prerequisites that you see here, like LDAP, DNS, NTP, certificates, call detail records receiver, and syslog server. So LDP, this is the only way to add end user accounts like Microsoft or OpenLDAP or any users. These accounts can be imported using third-party solutions like Microsoft. here. So Microsoft AD, which is used commonly. So this is the only way in the case of CMS, as in within the CMS, you cannot manually create users. So you need to have an external database through LDAP through which you will import users. You need DNS, very important, because in spaces in meeting server, we use URI formats, FQDNs. So it's based on domains. We need to have domains and we need to have DNS to resolve those domains. NTP is important for security and logging because in some encryption types, timestamp is used, like in MD5. Timestamp is used, which requires the use of NTP. So a timestamp is matched as one of the process of encryption and authentication there. So for security and for log information, for logging, time synchronization is required. Syslog server for getting the logs information. Again, there are different levels of syslog messages, like 7 in total, which can be changed to any level by default, which is set to 4. This is just about what syslog is. So this is necessary for storing logs on server storage. Uh, and the storage is small for syslog server, so that does not take a lot of storage there. Then a CDR receiver, it is necessary for storing call detail records, for statistics, for details, and for database. Uh, then local storage is small and is not accessible and is used if the CDR goes down. And certificates, of course, these are all the prerequisites to be enabled and that an administrator will need to enable before accessing CMS for it to function properly.